We know that we function best, and I don't mean this just we have the most fun, but we actually function best in environments where we feel safe, where we feel trusted, we know people have got our backs, where we feel like we're included. And that is the environment we need to create for your children, our learners. That is when the most learning takes place. Cognitive science tells us that the ability for information to be moved from our thinking brain into our storing brain is maximised when people feel confident, safe, comfortable, when they're engaged, when they are finding joy in their work. And we know that intuitively because we know the environments we function best at as a place to work. One of our jobs as a school is to create that environment for everybody. So one of our jobs is to ensure that that environment is created for learners in the classroom. It's created for the adults in the building as well, so we learn and develop. And it's created for you when you come onto site, to allow you to engage and grow and learn with us. And that underpins the work we're going to talk to you about how we approach behaviour management. This is a statement I've used for years and I love. Focusing on learners taking responsibility for their actions. And that's quite an easy thing to say and quite a deep thing to do. So they're actually engaging and taking responsibility for their actions, both positive and when they make poor decisions. Aligning consequences with the behaviour we're addressing. If the consequence doesn't align with the behaviour, there's no learning takes place. I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now. If your children go through school and they haven't been in trouble, we're in trouble. They have to learn how to move through problems and come out the other side because they're going to encounter them when they leave school. So part of our job is to make sure when that happens, there is a learning experience that goes on, and it is part of their ability to cope with adversity, to build resilience, and their ability to actually take on responsibility and deal with things for them. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can interact with us to support that. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Almost to a T, whenever we encounter poor decisions, poor behaviour, there will be damage to relationships at the time. And that is something we have to keep true to ourselves, because without relationships, we don't have trust and safety, we don't have psychological safety, we don't build resilience. So that is why we approach behaviour management in the way we do. And we're going to talk to you about how we approach behaviour management in the way that we do.
One of the most important things early on is step one is for us to build those relationships. That's building relationships with the learners in the classroom, outside of the classroom. It's building relationships with yourselves, ensuring, kind of what we're doing here today, ensuring that we all understand where we're going and why. On its simplest form, that's me very quickly in the classroom, making sure I know my learners' names as quickly as possible, making sure I know a little bit about Jimmy. Jimmy loves skateboarding. And on Monday morning, I say, any new tricks in the weekend? Automatically, Jimmy is like, Mr. Massey wants to know a little bit about this. And then next Monday he comes in, he's like, learned a new trick in the weekend. There's that relationship building going on, something as simple as that. It's important to maintain. You don't just stop there. We want your learners to feel a level of trust and care. And also, if we end up getting to that next stage, they're comfortable engaging in that process with you. There is restoration, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But the most important bit there, we're trying to get back to what we were talking about at the start. Okay? We're trying to help our young people develop their social intelligence. We're trying to help our young people be able to handle situations that aren't always rosy when they leave here, and having the skill set to do that. And then obviously we need to sustain. It's not just a process and then it's done. We need to follow up, We need to make sure things are still happening, and we need to have a very clear sort of action plan in place if things don't continue to go well.
We build those relationships with your children, and that's their tutors, their classroom teachers, the counsellors, SLT, learner services. Every part of this school is about building a relationship, and our relationship with you as well. So that means when the little things happen, like Mr. Massey alluded to, we can draw on what we know about your children. We can keep the small things small. But when things do become more serious, or they're ongoing, or they're persistent, we can use those relationships again. By the time we get to the more serious issues, and we're meeting with you as a family, and there are consequences for those behaviours, we're drawing again on this huge foundation that we have made with your children. And we have them around the school for a reason. They are a way to repair relationships, and we do use them with our learners. It provides a script. So when something's gone wrong, we ask learners what happened. Never ask a child why they did something. You may find this in your own parenting. Why did you do that? I don't know. But what happened is a much better question. So we might use this process to unpack what's gone wrong. We also use it to close the loop at the end. And you'll notice it's about moving forward. So when we have big friendship breakdown or relationship breakdown, actually we'll get the learners together and we figure out how we move forward from that. So we've talked about restorative is about taking responsibility for actions. It's about repairing the harm, and it's about restoring the relationship. But there's quite a meaty part as well here. It's about figuring out that there are consequences for the things that we do. And the great example that I always think works so well with restorative is a learner comes in the morning to their tutor time and they're wearing a cap, and the tutor says, "Oh, we don't wear hats in tutor time." And the learner says, "Okay," and takes it off. The next day they come in and they're wearing the hat again, and the tutor says, "I thought I made it clear we don't wear a hat. If you're wearing the hat tomorrow, what should we do?" And the learner might say, "Well, if I'm wearing the hat maybe tomorrow, you take it off me." The next day the learner comes in, they're wearing their hat, and the tutor can say, "We decided yesterday that you'd lose the hat," and the learner goes, "Okay." Now, what an idealistic answer, but the idea is that we're co-constructing with our learners. We don't have rules just for the sake of having a rule. Rules at our school are just about safety and keeping the workplace and the environment great for our kids. We don't have rules for rules' sake. We don't have a big rule book at Nexus. But when something does go wrong, we co-construct with our learners. So we've got this meaty part. There are consequences for our actions. And the outcome. This is so important. When we go through this process, we should have increased accountability. We should have improved relationships, improved environment. Someone mentioned physical and psychological safety, and enhanced emotional intelligence. Hopefully that learner might not do it again. I understand who I've harmed, and I understand why I was in the situation that I was in.
And what we're getting staff to do is, when dealing with a situation, thinking about where they are within this window and where ideally we'd like to be, and what is going to help us to help that young person, okay, learn those skills to be responsible, to take ownership, okay, and to be able to deal with situations like this well after Nexus. So you've got here, you can see up one axis, we've got structure and accountability, okay? Things get more structured, more accountable as we move up. Along here, we've got support and a very high level of care. Now, I know for me, as a first year teacher many moons ago, I definitely fell in here because I wanted everything to be rosy within my classroom. I didn't have a lot of time. So what this is sort of, you might be having that conversation and you're like, okay, what do we think? Okay, we don't really have time. If you say this and you say this and we say sorry and we move on, we're good. And oh, yep, we're good. But what's happened there is I've done the thinking for them. I've held that conversation, but I've done the thinking for them. They haven't processed that, and in fact haven't learnt anything from that. Okay, this one down here, we hope we don't see this often, but this would be myself seeing something in the playground and going, oh, they're a primary learner. I'll wait for a primary staff to pick that up. Now that doesn't happen, but it is important to acknowledge that part in the window. So, yeah, we tend to say this is answering for them. This is ignoring, all right? And then there's punitive, telling, okay? And this is very much, what do you think you would do? Well, I tell you what you're going to do, all right? And yes, we might need some punitive measures, but we want the learners to co-construct them with us. So they have understood that, they've been through that process, and therefore they're taking ownership, okay? Yeah, so this is telling, and on our worst days, yelling, and that might be in school, or it might be at home, okay? And what we try and get our staff to do is put themselves in this corner of the social discipline window, all right? Very much with the learners involved, all right? You can see that high level of structure, but also a high level of care. And again, we're coming back to those words, problem solving. Can we be respectful towards each other to work through this, be collaborative, and then can we come out of this being responsible? We've learnt from this process and we will use that again. We don't necessarily need the teachers involved next time when faced with a situation of conflict.
Just to add to what Graham's saying, this I think is, well, certainly my childhood was this experience. You do that, this happens. You do that, this happens. The punitive approach works to a degree in the sense that you can create an environment that is structured. What it doesn't do is actually engage the person who is being punished, and I spent quite a lot of my childhood being punished, and I don't think it made a blind bit of difference to the way I functioned. It may have inhibited some of my behaviours, but actually as a learning experience it was non-existent. At worst, and if you look at the studies when we look at incarceration, we know that punitive doesn't work. Punitive without restorative processes, countries that just send people to jail without actually trying to address the issues that got them there, just have people come out and repeat the crimes. So we know punitive doesn't work. However, as Graham is saying, in here, if there is no consequences, then there's no learning either, because it just becomes, all I've got to do is say sorry. And so what you'll see now is a balance between the two, and I think that's where our kind of market is, and that's why this window is so perfectly placed, where we have support and care alongside accountability.
We engage it so that the children can learn from it. That we want it to be a learning experience so they can be in the space feeling safe, happy, and knowing they can make mistakes, but also taking accountability for that as well.
When we withdraw a child from class, it's because that child is damaging the learning of others. It's that simple. They will have done damage to their peers or maybe a broader group. They get withdrawn from class. It's a consequence for them, but it's also an acknowledgement for that class that these sorts of behaviours are damaging learning and you're going to be withdrawn. If we're withdrawing a child from class, we're engaging you, and there is a consequence there as well. Our consequences are limited, so another area we might talk about is around here, students turning up late regularly. You're not giving us the time that we require of you. We're going to take some time back, and we're going to have you spend time with us after school, lunchtime break. Your time becomes our time. Failure to do homework, held back. Homework completed. The idea is you make it more uncomfortable to do the wrong things than the right things. But the consequence relates to the behaviour that's exhibited. When we move up to off-timetable reflection or external suspension, usually it's at a point where not only has their behaviour damaged the learning environment, but it's damaged a broader group. If there has been a major incident, it doesn't just impact the students in that incident, it impacts the people around the incident who saw it, and it makes them feel unsafe. It distracts them from their learning. So these consequences, again, align with the behaviour the impact of that behaviour. And as Alan talks about conversations, it's about getting the students to really understand that idea. I lost my temper, I struck someone. It's not just the person you struck that you've damaged. You've damaged the environment for everybody who saw that. And there is the point that they need to understand that we're now creating environments that don't feel safe. What we hope is the parents, when we work with you, fully understand why we've approached it in the way we've approached it, and that is going to be beneficial for the students who've made poor choices, but it's going to be equally beneficial for the students who have been on the receiving end of those poor choices. When we get this right, and we will get it right, your child will come and have a quiet chat with someone and say, over here there's some stuff going on that's really causing problems for my friends. And it's not telling tales, it's about creating the environment that they want to come to school in. And that's a very different beast. And I know this will happen because it's happened in other schools I've worked at. So the telling tales stops being a language. The creating a type of environment of the school I want to walk into starts becoming the language. And the best source of information is the learners in the room. They know what's going on. We don't always. We get windows into it. If I'm being honest, the level of difficulties that girls experience with other girls from the age of about year 6 through to about back end of year 10, early year 11 is high. And that's not a Nexus thing, that's a everywhere I've worked in the world thing. And it is our job and to work with parents to support them through processes that move them forward. Resolving those issues fully, well, I'd love to go to a school that has, because it would be a lot easier to work at. But it's part of that growing process. It's part of that separation from family. It's part of that readiness, I think, for life beyond school. And you're right. If we deal with it right, they will learn some lessons. If we deal with it wrong, we'll entrench some behaviours, and that's when it starts getting quite difficult.
So in our tutor time, in our PSHE, in our assemblies, we talk through and address scenarios like this. And we talk about it like putting it in your backpack, a skill set that I can then pull out later. So I've had a difficult conversation or a conflict and I've talked it through at home, or I've talked it through with a counsellor or a tutor. You've got that skill. Put it back there and use it when you need to. So by the time that scenario comes around again, we're constantly adding to that skill set to deal with that. I'm also hearing just some incredible things that parents are doing at home. You are such a big part of this journey. And when we get this right, we have learner, home and school as a triangle. And when things do get bad, and we are talking to you, there is something both terrifying and wonderful for a child to think home and school are in complete alignment around it. It can be terrifying because I've got both of these big institutions in my life talking to each other, but also how safe and secure you must feel when school and home are doing everything they can to support me.
The most important thing to understand is there is a big difference between actual intentional bullying and poor behaviour. Poor behaviour can manifest in a way that looks very much like bullying, but when you define bullying, it is repeated, deliberate attempts to hurt someone. So they are trying over and over again to actually hurt someone, and you'd use the word malicious. Bullying is viewed differently than poor behaviour. Poor behaviour, often they aren't actually aware that they're doing it. As Stephanie said, don't ask a 10-year-old boy why he did something. He doesn't know. You might be able to figure that out later, but the reality is he did it just because. His brain hasn't developed yet. I think it's 26 now. Bullying is a very different thing, and it's one where if it's not resolved, not spoken about, not addressed, it can continue and can have a huge impact, especially with the advent of social media, messaging, all that sort of thing. Unfortunately, when it used to happen at school, you get to go home. You don't get to go home and have a rest anymore. It continues. In fact, I would argue that the things that happen at home, online, on personal devices, on your Wi-Fi or your mobile networks are much more damaging than what happens in school, because people can see what's going on. So dealing with bullying is, at the forefront, but it's also one of these things that can remain hidden, as Simon said, for quite a time before we're actually made aware of it.
I mean, if it is bullying, we're heading towards suspensions. It's that simple. Because it is somebody maliciously causing harm to others, usually involving people around them to cause that harm, and they are absolutely damaging the environment that your children are coming into, that learners are experiencing. And we will suspend children for doing that almost across the board. There may be mitigating circumstances. A lot of the time, it's poor behaviour. It's fairly spontaneous. It is damaging. Frequently, when it is here, the child doesn't actually know the damage they've done. And when they understand the damage they've done, that is quite a shock to them. However, I think Alan is really getting it right. The online stuff tends to be more over here, and the stuff that happens in the playground tends to be more over here. So the answer to your question is, we need to find out what's happening. Usually when we start finding out what's happening, it's either, okay, that happened, and we deal with it. And the second thing we have to do with bullying is we can't just deal with the bullying. We have to go back and revisit to check that it's not continuing. So we deal with the situation that we're in, but then we need to check in 2 weeks' time, in 4 weeks' time, in 6 weeks' time, to ensure the issue that we think we've dealt with. So, and we take that very seriously. In serious cases, the victim, for want of a better word, will be very much part of the solution, and they will, to some degree, dictate terms. So they will be engaged in the process of what needs to be put right. Younger children, it tends to be quite fleeting and they get on with life. For older children, things can sit with them for really long periods, and we know that. It is a community that works on this. So we have control over the community that walks in. We have control over, a degree of control over the students, the learners in our care. We have a degree of control over the adults in our care. We don't have control over everything, and we don't know everything. This is becoming, and I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, you have got to understand your child's online presence. You have to understand it. I listened to a really interesting guy talk on a podcast about this idea of developing, and he was particularly talking about developing young men. And he said he reflected, as he was older, that he completely over-supervised his children in the environment. And he completely under-supervised his children online. And that's our tendency. We're solving all their problems for them. We're on play dates. We're around. We're dealing with issues between children. They're not developing skills. The online piece is where we believe much more damage can be done. We're going to have tighter expectations. One of the things that we recognise is that a lot of learners are putting apps onto their iPads that are actually, I'm going to give you an example. I picked up a child's iPad and I went into his social media account, and there were things in his social media account that he'd by default brought to school that someone had sent him that would have been enough to potentially expel him. So these are the things that we need your help with. We can take the social media apps off the devices, but they're still going to have their phones. So there's a balance here, and I think you're right. I think we've got to get more information out to all of our families, not just the families that turn up for these events, and allow them to understand. But we know certain pieces of software are really helping learning in the school, but can be used in ways that are damaging. But we also know there are a number of apps and things that are going on devices that are brought into school regularly that really have no educational value and have great potential to be used badly. So it's a good question, not one we have the answer to yet, but one that is being pondered throughout the education world. Where we can and where it's sensible, we won't involve parents because we want students to take responsibility and resolve the issues themselves. That obviously manifests itself more up the school than down the school. When we engage with you, Steph said in the ideal world, we're on the same page. That is not always the ideal world. And there are times where we just have to say, these are the values of the school. And I've said this to parents before, if you neither trust the school nor believe in our value systems, there comes a time when maybe the best thing for you to do is leave the school. That's kind of the nuclear end of the conversation. We will, in the same way Alan's described, we will talk families through what's happened. We will talk about the impact on others. One of the things that's really important through this conversation is we never talk about the child being bad or the learner being bad. We talk about the bad behaviour. We talk about the poor choice. And we keep that central to the conversation. We also keep the needs of the learner central to the conversation. We're working really closely with the tutors in secondary. So this is where I think that revisiting is most likely to happen. And we're thinking about the structure of the tutor groups and how that best lends itself to that following up, the making sure that we move forward in a manner that is appropriate.
It's something that we've become aware of as well. And so we've spent a lot of time, as Simon's alluded to, with Steph and myself, working with tutor teachers to create more structured time for them to reach out, not just when things go wrong, so that you're more familiar with them, they're more familiar with you, and hopefully it'll help build that triangle.
We talked at the start about the best source of information is learners about learners, particularly at secondary school. And if we can get to the point where learners are looking after each other, we don't get to the point where it really degenerates. And that will also be that peers have a much better understanding about online presence. Now, if we can get to that point where people see what's going on and come forward, maybe talk to you as families, talk to us, we can get in and deal with that before it becomes an issue. And that is incredibly powerful. How we do that, or how you do that as families, that's kind of utopia. Because we can, and the schools are doing this, remove devices. We can stop taking responsibility for behaviours that go on outside school. But we can't, because if it's going on outside school, it's going to come back into school. And your children, our learners, are going to have to go through the process of working out how this benefits them, not damages them. And we, at the moment, and you, are alongside them until they're about 16, 17, and all of a sudden they're then out in the world. So I don't know what the answer is. But I do know the answer is the more people accept this, and I'm talking about all of us, as an area that we will support each other in, not tell tales, the more likely we are to support students and learners and children make good decisions on the way.